Welcome back to CEO Money. I'm Ed Baxter, sitting in for Michael Yorba, who's spending some time in Las Vegas right now. Joining us now is Maggie Hadleigh, activist, filmmaker, and public speaker and director of the new film, Sick to Death. Welcome to the show, Maggie.
Hey, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Good. Maggie, you spent some time talking about and writing about and also making a film about something that seems to affect nearly 750 million individuals that I didn't know about in looking at the movie Sick to Death. And also, you're the founder of YoMaggie Productions. What is it that drives you or took you to this place? And talk to us about how you got to the place where you actually could make the film named Sick to Death.
Sure. Well, I have always been an activist. It's just in my inherent nature. And so I have been making social justice films for a long time, which can be found at YoMaggie.com. And the Sick to Death is always the movie that I say that I didn't want to make because it felt like it was way too personal. It was about me and my health journey, which it took me 32 years to be diagnosed with thyroid disease. And then I took medication that didn't work for me for 20 years, and I continued to be sick. And it wasn't until I was 53 years old and I had moved back to New Orleans, and I met a doctor on a fluke, and he showed me a medical book, and I realized that I should have been diagnosed when I was a child. And it was that moment that first made me so mad, then made me cry for 2 hours, and then I thought, oh my God, I have to make a movie because there's hundreds of millions of people just like me.
Well, obviously there are, and I think people diagnosed with either thyroid disease or hyperthyroidism, things that we've seen in the past. Do you think that, or do you have any particular reason why you think that doctors have misdiagnosed this for such a long time?
Yeah, I do actually. You know, there was a test called the TSH test that was developed in the late 50s, early 60s, and that became the gold standard for testing. And unfortunately, it only measures the thyroid hormone in the pituitary, and people have circulating thyroid hormone in the rest of their body, so it can appear as if you're fine, but you're actually very sick. And at the same time, doctors began to have limited time with patients. And so they no longer know or recognize the signs or the symptoms of thyroid disease, which are actually very obvious, but they completely rely on a faulty blood test. And then if somebody is lucky enough to be sick enough to be diagnosed, then they're often prescribed a medication that undertreats the vast majority of people.
Do you see this as a problem with Big Pharma and the dosages or the diagnosis that they have with regard to the condition itself? Or is it, like you said before, a function of where doctors don't have the time to actually do the diagnosis and would just rather give you something to make you feel better about it?
I think it's absolutely both. You know, the pharmaceuticals own the country at this point, and they own illness. And in this particular case, Synthroid and levothyroxine drugs own the business of thyroid disease, and they give money to the American Thyroid Association, they give money to the Endocrine Society, and they determine what the guidelines are. But if somebody has thyroid disease and they're like me and it's the autoimmune version of thyroid disease, levothyroxine drugs don't work well. And in fact, they can make you sicker and more susceptible to all kinds of other ailments. So absolutely the pharmaceuticals are involved in it. And there's also physician negligence. And there's also the impact of the health insurance companies telling doctors that they only have 6 minutes or 8 minutes with a patient. You know, so doctors don't touch bodies anymore. They don't listen to people, you know, because there's nothing special about me and my particular health journey. I should have been diagnosed when I was in single digits.
When you look forward and you think about drug development, things like that, and drugs that we have a biotech analyst that comes on a regular basis here, and they talk about drugs where the actual dosage costs $150,000 per person, some of them as high as $1 million. When you think about something like, you know, hyperthyroidism or thyroid disease, and you don't necessarily see drugs that actually bring that kind of revenue, do you think that's a problem with the development of things that are more cure versus treatment?
Well, I don't think we aim towards cure at all. I think that the drug companies aim towards, you know, treating symptoms and keeping people ill. There is, in fact, a drug that is much more effective for the vast majority of people, and that is natural desiccated thyroid. It's been around since the 1890s, It's natural pig hormone from pigs, but it's thyroid hormone. And they also have it from cows. And in my body, it feels way better. But I think one of the biggest problems with the medical industrial complex is they don't want to give patients options, or they don't want us advocating for ourselves.
That was your tip to, I guess, we'll talk about Dwight Eisenhower. I kind of got that one there. Maggie, let's talk about Sick to Death and your journey in making that film and what you expect people to get out of watching it.
Well, the first thing I'd say, if anybody wants to watch the movie, it can be found at my website. That's the easiest way to get to the Vimeo or the Amazon link. So it's sick2death.com. And I think the most important thing about it is that when people watch the movie, they will either recognize themselves, recognize somebody they know or love, or be prepared for it when it may happen to them. But because there's so much illness in this country right now, and your thyroid is a primary gland in your body, and in most people at one point or another, your thyroid starts to go south. So it's good for people to see what could potentially happen and know how to advocate for themselves.
Perfect. Maggie, we're up against it here. We're getting close to our end here as far as our interview was concerned. For people who are interested in listening to more of what you do and what you advocate, how do they get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of me is through my website, sick2death.com or YoMaggie.com. And I'm pretty easy to find on the interweb. And, I hope to help a lot of people feel better in this country.
Perfect, Maggie. Thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate it. I'm planning on looking at that movie. Didn't have time today, but we will. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. First of all, I want to thank you for joining us today at CEO Money. Again, Michael should be back tomorrow. This particular section was sponsored by our title sponsor, Tycon Partners. Remember, we have our podcast and our show archives that you can get at any time. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow with more great content.